Introduce
Ed Peterson. I'm formerly the digital director for the National Republican Congressional Committee, where we raised and spent money on House races on behalf of Republicans. And I'm starting in February with national media with Jamie and Cara and Melissa and the team. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Greta Carnes. I'm at ACRONYM, which was a digital progressive firm that was formed last year, 2017 now, to sort of try to rethink the way that digital is thought about, especially on campaigns and in electoral contexts. And so specifically what I do is I am sort of at the intersection of digital organizing and technology.
Hi everyone, my name is John Adams. I'm at the NRCC. I'm the digital director there, so oversee all of the low-dollar fundraising for mailed telemarketing, and I've done that for the past 2 cycles.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot this morning about how hot and popular this channel is. So I'll just throw it out to the 3 of you. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's right now, I mean, from a legal standpoint, it's a murky issue. Everybody's like, is this going to continue to be legal or not? As of right now, and the lawyers who I've talked to, things seem to be in a position where they're, until the FCC makes a ruling, like this is going to move forward, and if it's going to go that way, it is a very powerful tool when it comes to direct marketing.
Yeah, and in terms of digital marketing, especially, we had this argument forever with digital marketing that it was one-to-one. We could upload this voter file and reach these people through Facebook or through programmatic means or whatever it was. This is legitimately one-to-one. We can match someone's cell phone. There's no, anonymizing of it like they would in Facebook or in any programmatic platform. This is a one-to-one contact with our voters and donors.
So Greta, I'm going to throw this to you. You ran peer-to-peer texting for Hillary's campaign in the 2016 Iowa caucus and general election. Can you share some of the lessons you learned and some of the success?
Yeah, so I've been a texting director like 6 times, which is a rare career rabbit hole. But so I ran texting for Hillary, and then especially in the Iowa caucus, and then also for the Rob Quist special election. Remember the body slam election? And then also last fall, or 2 falls ago now, in Virginia for the coordinated campaign, and then recently in Indiana for the coordinated campaign. And sort of what I've seen over time is that texting has sort of become, especially for Democrats, a little bit less effective, and I think it's just because there is more saturation. So when we were running texting for the Iowa caucus, pretty much everybody we were texting knew that the Iowa caucus was coming. It's hard to be an Iowan and not know when the caucus is in caucus season. And so what we found is that because it was such a high salience election, texts really didn't move people at that point. Nobody woke up on February 1st and was like, oh right, this is happening today. I guess I'll go. And I think the same was true for the general election. Everybody knew when the general election was. The text was not going to move somebody to vote or not. But then for the lower salience elections, texting was really good as a GOTV tool. So like the Montana special election, it was on a Thursday. It was a really fast election. We only had about 80 days. Nobody knew what was happening. And so it was really effective to let, especially because the universe for a special election is going to be different. It's going to be people who do want to vote. But I think especially going forward, we're going to see, I think 2018 was a really good example. We saw a ton of campaigns use texting. A ton of people were texting. But in Virginia, we were at least able to coordinate. So we were able to talk to people, and I coordinated all the texting so we weren't slamming every voter with 35 texts reminding them to vote. But I think especially in 2018, in a lot of the states, we couldn't coordinate on either side of the wall. Voters got slammed. A lot of voter data got lost because of it. Voters didn't feel like they had cohesive conversations with campaigns or with groups. And so I think going forward, we're going to need to, especially on the left, rethink how we use peer-to-peer texting so we're using it smarter.
So can you take me through a little bit on exactly how you run a peer-to-peer text messaging campaign, starting with getting the phone numbers and the outreach, how that works?
Sure. So the way the NRCC like peer-to-peer can be used for multiple things. The way I used it most was for fundraising because I'm not on the IE side, I'm focused on raising the dollars and they're focused on spending the dollars. But from a fundraising standpoint, typically what I did is I worked with a ton of different groups, but we had our donors modeled to find people who are not on our house file. So I actually believe that your house file text messaging list is the most impressive form of fundraising right now. It is better than email, your house file. Peer-to-peer is actually, we use that to go get people who are not opted into our house lists. So we would have our donors modeled to get new cell phone donors, people who look like our donors, but we do not currently have their cell phone numbers. We would then blast out text to them, and typically, I mean, there's SMS, there's MMS. A lot of times, I have 4 videographers who traveled or went around to when the president spoke at rallies. We filmed them direct to camera, so we would cut that video, and a lot of times put an MMS, which is a video, into the text message in the peer-to-peer, and then is basically Trump saying, you know, I need a Republican Senate, blah, blah, blah. It included a link for a donation button. Click on the link. Then the voter was allowed to donate. So, but it is a very effective form of raising money.
Anything to add to that, how you use it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of sort of how the sausage is made, John made a good point about having the house file. So one thing to really take into account with the text messaging is that it is extremely illegal to have a computer text message a group of numbers. For example, I couldn't just upload a list of 100,000 numbers and just click send on a computer and have it send out. A class action lawsuit could come out of that. It's a violation of the TCPA, and you will be shut down. And even for commercial, especially for commercial, if you're trying to sell something, what we can do with what peer-to-peer is set up to do is have one person send a message to another person, a one-on-one communication. And that can be done through a couple of different ways. A lot of groups have set up apps where volunteers can download the app and basically sit there within the app and click send and, you know, potentially edit the message a little bit.
So how many volunteers do you need to have an effective campaign?
Greta would probably be able to answer that a little bit better than I would. A lot. So the other way people have gotten around it is to use call centers and hire people to actually click, you know, send to these lists. But the requirement is it has to be one human, one click, one recipient. And that's how we get around the TCPA.
Greta, you nodded your head when said a lot, so.
We had in Indiana this fall 1,000 volunteers who sent, I think, 3 million texts in the final 4 days. But yeah, for Hillary we did, I think it was 5,000 volunteers sent 10 million texts in 4 days.
Wow.
But I also think there's something to be said about like having volunteers do your texting inherently makes for a different experience for whoever you're talking to. So I think for fundraising it's like one thing, but if you're, you know, running like a persuasion campaign, you don't want to have like a call center who's texting people because they'll, you know, they won't be as familiar with the issues or they won't be as persuasive. If you want to get people to volunteer, it's hard to outsource that to volunteers. Volunteers are not going to be able to give the nitty-gritty of like, where do I park for my volunteer shift and stuff like that. So I also think that it's worth marrying with organizing.
Yeah, but on the Republican side, in the call centers, we are able to set up, you're allowed to do these 6 different responses. And on the Republican side, you typically get one of 3 responses, which are, who is this, MAGA, or stop.
We get those too.
You didn't say any of the curse words that we sometimes get.
So take us through a little bit of the cost for this and how it compares to using other channels to get your messages out.
I mean, in terms of its ability to reach a voter file list, I would compare it most to mail, right? Because there's that direct, like, address, telephone match similarity, and it is much cheaper than mail by like $1 per piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think it ranges anywhere between 6 and 15 cents, depending on who you work with, but they're more than just those costs. I mean, the majority of our cost is data cost, and on the fundraising side, P2P is amazing, but it's nothing without the data. And I would actually say, like, the data is something you like have to invest in, because I've texted to just voter files trying to raise money, and while we were able to raise money, I've texted to model data, and it's like night and day.
And what are the things that peer-to-peer text messaging does well, and what are some of the things that perhaps it's not the best channel to use? Greta. Yeah.
So I've run, I would say 5 types of program with peer-to-peer texting. One that we did was persuasion. I would never run a persuasion program again. We did this in Virginia. We very much tried to, have it mirror like neighbors talking to neighbors as much as possible. So we tried to have people from a locality only text people who lived near them, but that would be pulled from the voter file. So we pulled all of our persuasion targets, but we recruited volunteers in specific little neighborhoods of Virginia to talk to those people. But ultimately we found people are just not really moved by getting a text from an unknown number. I don't know that any of you in this room would be moved from somebody texting you being like, hey, I think I know more about this election than you do. So I would never run another persuasion texting. The most popular obviously is like mobilization, so GOTV. In Virginia, I way overthought our GOTV program, and it was like this 7-day text out the vote program. We went through the voter file. It was too much. But so essentially what we found was that it probably didn't make a huge difference. And again, it's because for high salience elections, the voters you're texting have already been called, they've already gotten mail, they've already received 150 digital ads, and they just don't, the extra text is not what's gonna push them over the edge to voting. It's much better for like low salience elections where people don't know there's an election. We've also run, in Indiana, we ran an early vote program. So instead of trying to get people to vote, trying to get people to vote early. And we found that that's incredibly effective. And it's mostly because people who you're texting to vote early want to receive those texts. I always think that the key to a successful texting program is the text that you're sending, does the person you're sending it to want to get it? And so I think that that's why the most effective use of texting, especially on the Democratic side, we know Democrats are really moved by being organized. We know that all of the past really big successful victories for Democrats have been because of organizing. And I think when we give organizers the keys to peer-to-peer texting tools, we make them more effective. But also organizers texting people and asking them to volunteer, those are people who want to be texted. Those are people who want to be contacted by a local campaign. A volunteer target is inherently different than a mobilization target or a persuasion target. And so I think, especially as more people start using peer-to-peer texting, more groups start using it and can't coordinate with campaigns, more campaigns of every level and up and down the ticket start using this separately, we're going to see that people who don't want to receive texts are going to stop receiving texts. My guess is carriers are eventually going to respond, and they're going to start putting in spam filters that are more thorough. We've already seen that Apple is interested in doing this, but I think that we're going to have to figure out how to text people who want to be texted, and my guess is mostly that's going to be for volunteer recruitment.
And open rates for texts, I'm reading well above 90%. You agree?
Yeah, how many texts do you guys have unread right now? I have
And
0.
most are open within 3 seconds, except me from my wife when she's asking for groceries, but other than that. Let's talk about the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which we alluded to. So how will this impact the use of this channel?
Yeah, I mean, they could totally shut it down. The FCC has the power to make a decision on this at any time.
Agree?
Yeah, I agree, but I'm no lawyer, so until they put a red light in front of us, I assume all the political entities will continue to push forward.
And again, like I mentioned before, this is a tool only for nonprofits and for political institutions. It can't be used for commercial purposes.
Right. And for the, and that act prohibits against sending mass text messages to consumers. And it was updated in 2013 to require prior consent. Are you concerned with annoying the audiences that you're reaching out to? I mean,
I thought Greta made an interesting point about how this was less effective for the November elections as it was, compared to some of the specials that she may have worked on. I think the Democrats definitely had an enthusiasm surge this cycle. I would say that when we did some get out the vote texts, it didn't hurt, right? I mean, we were trying to get these people out who had come out and voted for Trump in 2016, and we wanted to get them out, and we didn't have that same enthusiasm that the left had, and I believe that the texting did help.
And let's also keep in mind, while it may be annoying to all of us sitting in the room if we were just having our phone blown up, but the reality is like, you can reply stop. So, I mean, it's not like we're just continuing to blow these people up, and I would not advocate for us to be able to do it if there was not a way to stop it.
would you say there's any difference between the way Republicans and Democrats use this channel?
I mean, I think right now at this point, like I think it's a new technology. I know Hustle's been around for a while, but I think it's still evolving, and so like until somebody does something that maybe in 2020 somebody will do something that's like wildly different but with the text messaging. I think right now both we use it for similar things. I mean, we were able to recruit like, I think 500 volunteers within minutes for the Florida recount.
Wow.
So
Greta, thoughts on that?
I mean, the one thing that I think a lot about is like, you know, in Ohio this year, like Sherrod Brown's campaign running, you know, texting people, and they have a text with a voter who's like a GOTV voter and just saying like, you know, hey, I'm Greta, I wanted to talk about the election. They have this like really meaningful interaction, they talk about it, you figure out what issues are important to the voter, and it's like, let's say like the best case scenario of how a texting conversation goes. And then 2 days later, Planned Parenthood, I'm so sorry, both Sherrod and Planned Parenthood run very good texting programs, this is just an example. But like, let's say 2 days later, Planned Parenthood texts the same voter and says, hey, I'm Greta, I'm, you know, with Planned Parenthood, I want to talk about the election this fall. This voter is like, oh my God, I just went through this. And even worse, like, you know, imagine like it's, you know, the DNC who texts it, or it's like, you know, the D-Trip, and like those are more nebulous entities to a voter, and they've just had this meaningful interaction that all of a sudden you realize the data has never been coordinated, and the voter has just been, you know, had, and it makes the texting platform seem less intimate than it is. And so that's one of my fears with this, is that I think we're in a place where oversaturation is a real risk. I don't want texting to become what email is, where
Right.
people have more thorough spam filters, or they just, you know, sign up to a bunch of stuff and just start filtering stuff out because they know it's spam, and it's a place where they know that there is literally, like it's crazy to me that we have literally an entire thing that we communicate with that has a spam filter. Like texting could become that, and I think carriers are gonna see this and respond to it. I mean, how many texts did you guys get this cycle? If you're living in DC, probably fewer, but I still have a Colorado cell phone number, and I was hundreds of texts by the end. And I think that interactions are gonna become less meaningful, and people are gonna start seeing through the medium, and right now our only advantage is that people see it as an intimate way to communicate.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the texting is going to get opened up to more than just political and nonprofit, right? I mean, I agree with Greta that there's probably going to be an oversaturation, and part of what's going to be the problem is there are going to be factors outside of the U.S. that don't care about the TCPA in India or wherever that are just going to start texting you and texting your parents and texting your grandparents to try to do these things that the Indians do when they try to get your credit card, you know, right? That all is going to start happening in text too, if you haven't already seen it.
And just looking ahead 15 months, you think peer-to-peer text messaging will play a critical role in the 2020 presidential election? And could that be a watershed year for its use?
I definitely think it will play a huge factor. I mean, there's a lot to be determined with how does the media cover the president. I mean, the president's team, I actually used Open Sesame at the NRCC. Its founder was Gary Kobe, who works closely with the president's team. And like those guys, sort of the Trump campaign for the Republican side sort of started this in 2016, this texting on the Republican side. And if the media covers what the president feels like is unfairly, which is probably likely, like will just say, you know what, we'll go directly to our voters. And that's via text. So I think they will use text more than anyone's ever used text before.
Wow, great. Steve, do we have time for 1 or 2 more questions here? Greta, I'm going to throw this to you. Can you predict which Democratic candidate will use the peer-to-peer channel most effectively a year from now?
Who are you working with?
I think that the candidate who uses peer-to-peer text, so I think the key to winning, you know, a primary this cycle when there's so many candidates out there is going to be organizing, right? Like ads are going to be fine, people's pre-existing, you know, opinions are going to be fine, but it's not like it's going to be, you know, Hillary versus Bernie again. Like and with time, we have so much time. It's going to come down to organizing. It's going to be people building relationships on the ground. And, you know, the last Iowa caucus win was a real organizing win. You guys remember we won by like one like shave of a fingernail? But it's because we organized really, really successfully, and so did the Bernie campaign. And I think that when you have 100 organizers on the ground in Iowa, and you have 15 in New Hampshire, and you've got 40 in Nevada, you need those organizers to be as effective as possible. And having organizers be effective means that they need to be reaching people in ways that have better contact rates than just calling them all day, every day. And texting is a really good example of this. And so I truly, really hope that I'm the last texting director. We should not be having somebody sitting in an HQ anymore just pulling lists by herself, texting people with her 1,000 volunteers who are across the country and she's never met in person. Like, that doesn't make sense anymore. But if we give texting to organizers, I feel like I've really been a downer about texting today, but use for texting, and I think it's, if we give texting to organizers to use as a personal communications tool, we let organizers pull their own lists. In a Thursday morning, they pull the list of all the people who are supposed to be at their phone bank that night to confirm them. They're texting people who, don't pick up the phone because they don't have landlines. They're texting people who work during the day and aren't sitting at home at 2 p.m. waiting for a phone call from an organizer. We will be able to bring in more people into Democratic campaigns. We'll be able to bring in more diverse people because we won't just call old white women who sit at home during the day, which is what our volunteer base is right now. And I think that we will give organizers the power to be more effective with how they organize, and they'll be more efficient at it. And I think that that's how, if the campaign that has the most effective and efficient organizing program, I believe, has a huge advantage going into the primary.
Thank you. Steve.
We have time for questions.
I was wondering if you guys had followed. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Peter Posse with Zeta Global. I was wondering.
You are, Peter.
I know. By the way, we Indians don't want your credit card. Just letting you know.
Sorry,
the Russians,
sorry. The scammers. I'm sorry. That was a mistake.
Just letting you know. Got to speak up. But have you guys followed the Verizon deal with the Reminder app that they shut down? They put a fee on this mass texting. Have you followed this? This happened in the last 24 hours, and there's some concern over this. And how does this relate to, what Ajit Pai did, another Indian guy who wants your credit card? But
I'm sorry. I
it's okay.
misspoke.
I'm just teasing you. But how is this going to affect moving forward regulation? Not regulation, but really what the carriers do. And are you guys concerned about that? Do you know anything about, have any visibility into the fees they may charge for multiple or mass texts? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the FCC is not the only factor that could put a stop to all of this texting. The carriers have a big part in it as well. And so that's one of the barriers to entry into starting a texting company, for example, is like you need connections with the carriers. You need to be in with them. You need to know who to call when your numbers do get shut down. But yeah, they could be very well clamping down on this, like Greta said, putting in more spam filters. They're the other big barrier, aside from the FCC, to keeping this type of peer-to-peer texting going.
We also saw that a little bit already this cycle happen. Hustle was facing some issues because carriers, especially like Sprint, and AT&T started to identify if you were sending out links, and if they saw that one set of phone numbers was sending out an enormous number of links, they would just shut it down.
How are you doing back-end accountability for all of this in terms of really measuring where your impact is coming in? And also, for instance, when we were talking to Patrick from DNC earlier, he had the unexpected benefit from texting of actually seeing offline and direct mail responses go up on the people that he texted. But one of the reasons he was able to do that is because the infrastructure allowed for those two groups to talk to each other. So they really knew what was happening and they could see that impact. So I'm curious, on the back end, what sort of accountability are you getting for texting, and how are you tying it to other actions?
Sure. So like I said, I oversee the direct mail, telemarketing, and digital. I've done that for 2 cycles at the NRCC. Our entire program is integrated. So I send chase texts as well, chasing down mail pieces saying, hey, we sent you a mail piece. It actually looks like this. Click the link in case you lost it. But we also, one of the things that's not really related to peer-to-peer, but it's related to my house program, is I actually put a keyword on every mail piece that we sent out that is unique. So I get an indication of how many people are actually opening mail. That's one of the toughest things about mail is you can get the response rate based on how many people are sending checks or just sending reply forms, whether they have money in them or not, but you're not really getting an indication of what the open rate is. Where I actually put a unique keyword that people can text in, and it's not perfect science, but it does give me an indication. I know if one keyword, I see all of a sudden tons of people sending this in, and we actually sent a direct mail piece from the president where we saw this, like, the mail piece was signed by the president, we had tons of people texting in, which let me know tons of people were opening this mail piece, which I then knew on the back end to budget accordingly, because you get, once you do this a bunch, you get an indication of how much money you're going to bring in based on the number of people who are replying to your mail piece. But yeah, I use it for cross channels as well.
Well, and I think too, I mean, I think it's a great question. And it's hard to measure how many people did you persuade with a persuasion text? You know, were they actually persuaded? Were they persuaded all the way to vote at the election? But I think that that's another reason why I so fervently believe that we need to give texting to organizers. It's because when organizers control their own scripts, they control their own lists, they also control their own data. They know how many people they texted who actually showed up. They can measure their own flake rates. They can measure their own conversion rates. And I think that that's how we will be able to not only figure out if it's working or not for organizing, but also optimize.
How are you managing quality control as you're dispersing authority out to the edges here? And we've been hearing a lot about that today, about moving authority and activation and tool sets farther out to the edges. How are you ensuring some sort of quality control so that you're not getting incidents, rogues at the edges blowing up in your face and suddenly becoming big issues for you nationally?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's also, I think, one of the reasons why, I think it's one of two reasons why we haven't been able to scale texting to organizers yet. The other is the technology piece. Nobody wants to go in the back end of Hustle. But so I think part of it is when you're running it, so the texting programs that I've run, where you're outsourcing texting to literally 1,000 volunteers, a lot of these volunteers you've never met before, and they've just signed up via a Google Doc. And so already the risk is there, right? And so some of the tools like Relay allow you to be able to look in people's inboxes. Hustle now allows you to do that too. And so that's, you know, one piece of this is just the management of the quality control. But I think in terms of like culturally and structurally, how do we give this to organizers and let them, you know, trust them to write their own scripts and stuff? I think a lot of it is training, and it's good training. But organizers are already the best people in the world to craft a hard ask. I mean, if you ask an organizer, if you are sitting down with an organizer, they will get you to volunteer by the end of that conversation. They're just better at it than you are. And so I think a really good example of this was in Virginia in 2017. I had a deputy who was an organizer in Pennsylvania the cycle before for Hillary. And I, you know, from texts for GOTV shifts. And my script, of course, was like, hey, Carol, just want to make sure we'll see you tomorrow for your volunteer shift. And my deputy, Alexis, was like, no, we need to have it. Carol, we need 6 more volunteers. Who are you bringing with you tomorrow? And it was like the difference in those two texts, A, is intimacy, right? Like my text sounds like a spam text. Hers does not. It sounds urgent, and it sounds like she needs this woman to do something. But I think the second is that organizers are just better at hard asks. And I think we already trust them to make phone calls. We trust them to do all the direct voter contact on their turf. We trust them to host meetings. We trust them to manage political relationships. Giving them the tools to be able to run their own texting and email programs is just the next step in this.
Yeah, I would emphasize what Greta said about we already trust, I mean, this risk already existed with phone banking and door knocking, right? I mean, they could potentially say anything. But if you give an 18-year-old kid the option to phone bank, door knock, or text, he's choosing text, or she.
But I think in the 2020 cycle, on the Republican side, I can imagine data trust is going to step in heavily, and it will be something that we pass a tag back to them that says, hey, I've already texted this person, so they can run some type of quality control on that.
Howard, panel, that was great stuff. Thank you very much.